Do you remember Palu? Most of the world forgot this city the moment the news cameras left in 2018, but the people living there never forgot. And at 10:27 in the morning on Tuesday, June 16th, 2026, the ground beneath Central Sulawesi shook again. A magnitude 6.7 earthquake, shallow, violent, striking the exact region where the earth itself turned to liquid 8 years ago and swallowed entire neighborhoods whole, if you have family in Indonesia. If you remember the images from 2018 of houses sinking into forcing an entire city to relive its worst memory, you need to watch this full video, because here is what happened. The Indonesian Meteorology, Climatology, and Geophysics Agency, known as BMKG, confirmed the earthquake struck at a depth of approximately 10 to 16 kilometers, with the epicenter located about 42 kilometers southeast of Palu. The mechanism was identified as an oblique normal fault with strike-slip movement, traced to the Sausu fault. This is a different fault system than the one responsible for the catastrophic 2018 rupture, but it sits in the same broader tectonic zone that has made Central Sulawesi one of the most seismically dangerous regions in all of Indonesia. This next part matters. Within hours, BMKG recorded more than 70 aftershocks, the strongest reaching magnitude 5.2. Ground shaking intensity reached level 6 to 7 on the modified Mercalli intensity scale in Toru, Parigi Mutong, and South Parigi. That intensity level means strong, frightening shaking capable of cracking walls and toppling unsecured objects. The kind of shaking that sends people running into the streets without thinking. Patients were evacuated from hospitals in Parigi, Mutong Regency, as the buildings shook around them, some still connected to IV drips, carried outside to open ground for safety. A 4-star hotel in Palu evacuated. Every guest, including those who had remained in their rooms during the initial shaking. The general manager described panic as the natural reaction, but confirmed everyone made it out safely with only minor damage to the building itself. The National Disaster Management Agency, known as BNPB, confirmed one person died in Sigi Regency as a direct result of the earthquake. At least 8 others were injured in Sigi alone, 2 with serious injuries rushed to nearby hospitals by the National Search and Rescue Agency. Images from the affected region showed structures with collapsed roofs, shattered walls, and debris scattered across streets in Palu City, Sigi Regency, and Parigi Mutong Regency. Here's why this is serious beyond the immediate numbers. 3 regencies close to the epicenter, home to a combined population of 1.2 million people, had not been fully assessed in the hours immediately following the quake. That is not a small detail. That means the true scope of damage and injury across this region was still unknown even as initial reports were being published. Roads were damaged, water infrastructure was disrupted. Communication and access to the hardest hit rural areas remained limited exactly when accurate information mattered most. Most people are missing this. Palu is not simply a city that happened to be near an earthquake. Palu is a city built directly inside one of the most studied and most feared liquefaction zones on the planet. To understand why this new earthquake carries weight far beyond its magnitude, you have to understand what happened here on September 28, 2018. On that day, a massive magnitude 7.5 earthquake ruptured along the Palu-Koro fault, a strike-slip fault running directly through the city's neck-shaped valley. The rupture propagated approximately 160 kilometers, generating a local tsunami that struck Palu Bay with waves reaching 3 to 4 meters, and in some localized areas as high as 6.8 meters. But the tsunami was not what made 2018 so uniquely catastrophic. It was something far stranger and far more terrifying. Liquefaction. Here's what liquefaction actually means, and why the Palu Valley is so uniquely vulnerable to it. Beneath the city lies thick alluvial soil, loose sand and sediment saturated with high groundwater. When violent shaking strikes ground like this, the intense vibration causes poor water pressure inside the soil to spike dramatically, while the soil's internal shear strength collapses. The solid ground beneath buildings, roads, and entire neighborhoods essentially turns into a thick, flowing liquid. Houses do not just fall down in this process. They sink, tilt, and are carried along the surface as the ground itself moves like a slow-motion wave of mud. In the neighborhoods of Balaroa, Petobo, and Jono Oge, this is exactly what happened in 2018. Whole sections of these communities were swallowed as the ground beneath them flowed like a river of liquefied earth, carrying homes hundreds of meters from where they had stood, burying others completely beneath the surface. Researchers studying the disaster found that liquefaction occurred at depths reaching 16 meters below ground level, and that an unlined agricultural irrigation canal running through the valley played a critical role by artificially raising the groundwater table, making the soil even more susceptible to total collapse. More than 4,000 people were killed in 2018, a significant portion of them buried as their neighborhoods literally dissolved beneath them. That land has not changed. The geology that made Palu the site of one of the most devastating liquefaction disasters in modern history is still exactly the same geology sitting beneath the city today. The thick, saturated sediments are still there. The shallow groundwater is still there. The irrigation canals are still there. The fundamental vulnerability that turned entire neighborhoods into flowing mud in 2018 was never removed. It was simply waiting for the next earthquake, strong enough and shallow enough to trigger it again. This is why the magnitude 6.7 event on June 16, 2026, immediately reawakened a fear that has never fully left this community. Residents who survived 2018 know exactly what that kind of shaking can do to the ground beneath their feet. They do not need a scientist to explain liquefaction to them. They watched it happen with their own eyes. They lost neighbors, family members, entire streets to it. When the earth started moving again on Tuesday morning, that memory was not abstract history. It was immediate, visceral, and terrifying. Fortunately, in this specific event, BMKG modeling indicated no tsunami potential. And, as of the most recent updates, officials confirmed no large-scale liquefaction had been triggered by this particular quake. That is meaningfully different from 2018, and it reflects both the differing characteristics of this earthquake and the fact that not every strong tremor in this region produces the same catastrophic ground failure. But here is why this is serious for the long term. The Palu region sits at the convergence of multiple active fault systems. And BMKG's own analysis confirms this latest event originated from the Sausu fault, a structure separate from the Palu-Koro fault responsible for 2018, yet operating within the same broader, highly active tectonic environment. Consider what this tells seismologists about the region as a whole. Central Sulawesi is not dealing with a single dangerous fault that has already released its energy. It is dealing with an entire network of interconnected fault systems beneath and around the Palu Valley, each capable of independently generating significant, damaging earthquakes. The 2018 rupture relieved stress along one fault. It did nothing to relieve pressure building along the others. This 2026 event proves that the broader region remains seismically active and capable of producing magnitude 6 and higher earthquakes with little warning. One more thing you need to know. Palu is home to approximately 400,000 people, the capital of Central Sulawesi province. This is not an empty or remote landscape. It is a functioning populated city that has spent 8 years rebuilding, relocating displaced communities away from the most dangerous liquefaction zones and trying to recover both physically and psychologically from one of the deadliest natural disasters in recent Indonesian history. And on Tuesday morning, the ground reminded everyone living there that recovery does not mean the danger has passed. Think about what this means for a parent in Sigi Regency who has just watched their home crack and their neighbor's house collapse, knowing that the ground beneath their community has already proven capable of completely liquefying. Think about hospital staff evacuating patients on IV drips into open fields for the second time in less than a decade. Think about families across 3 regencies still waiting for officials to even confirm the full scope of what has been damaged, while aftershocks continue rattling. Through a landscape already scarred by collective trauma, Indonesia's broader seismic record only deepens the concern. In January 2021, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake near Mamuju, also on Sulawesi Island, killed at least 100 people, with thousands sleeping outdoors for days afterward, too afraid of aftershocks to return to their homes. This is a region where major, damaging earthquakes are not rare. Anomalies. They are a recurring, expected feature of life along one of the most active tectonic boundaries on Earth. The BMKG has dispatched a special survey team to assess the ground conditions directly, and authorities have urged residents to stay away from any building showing visible cracks or structural damage, while remaining alert for further aftershocks. More than 70 aftershocks. Recorded within hours of the main event signal that the fault system involved has not yet finished releasing the stress that built up before Tuesday's rupture. The 2018 disaster taught the world, and taught Palu's residents most painfully of all, that an earthquake in this region is never just about shaking. It is about what shaking does to ground that has already proven it can fail catastrophically. The Sausu fault that ruptured this week is not the Palu-Koro fault that destroyed Balaroa, Patobo, and Jono Oge 8 years ago, but it sits inside the same valley, above the same saturated alluvial soil, surrounding the same communities still carrying the memory of watching the earth turn to liquid. The aftershocks are still being recorded. The damage assessments across 3 regencies and 1.2 million people are still ongoing. And in Palu tonight, families who survived the deadliest moment in their city's modern history are once again watching the ground beneath their homes, waiting to see if it will hold. There is a deeper layer to this story that deserves attention, because it explains exactly why scientists studying the 2018 disaster have continued returning to Palu year after year. Researchers who examined satellite imagery before and after the original earthquake discovered something that surprised even seasoned geotechnical experts. The land beneath the Palu Valley had not simply shaken violently. It had moved as a coherent mass, flowing hundreds of meters in places, carrying houses, roads, and entire sections of neighborhoods along with it, as if the ground itself had become a slow river. Some researchers have pointed to the role of long-term agricultural irrigation in the valley, arguing that decades of wet rice cultivation steadily raised the local groundwater table, quietly preparing the ground for exactly the kind of large-scale failure that followed once a strong enough earthquake struck. That detail matters enormously for understanding the risk that remains today. The irrigation canals are still there. The cultivation practices that elevated groundwater levels across the valley floor have not disappeared in the years since 2018. The geological conditions that made liquefaction possible were never a temporary anomaly created by one specific earthquake. They are a permanent feature of how this valley was built and farmed, sitting quietly beneath the surface, regardless of which fault produces the next significant tremor. This is why earthquake risk in Palu cannot be measured by tracking a single fault line. The Palu-Koro fault that ruptured in 2018 remains active and capable of producing another major event in the future. The Saosu fault that ruptured this week is a separate structure entirely, yet it sits close enough to influence stress patterns across the broader region. Seismologists studying the area have noted that since 2018, numerous smaller earthquake clusters have continued occurring across Sulawesi, each one a reminder that the tectonic forces driving this region have not gone quiet simply because the most devastating single event already happened.